Starmer, have you got the numbers? Have you got the tactics in the House of Commons to stop him?
Well, Keir was clear that what he wants to do is overturn the referendum result. He doesn't want to respect what people voted for in 2016.
He says that they didn't vote for no deal, and that's what he's trying to stop.
Well, Keir and the Labour Party said in their 2017 election manifesto that they would respect the referendum result. And now the Labour Party's position is to say that we need to renegotiate a new deal, then present that deal to the country, and then in that new referendum that the Labour Party want to bring about, they would campaign to remain. They're trying to cancel the referendum result. They're trying to overturn what the British people voted for. It's anti-democratic.
You've neatly turned it to the Labour Party, but my question is, do you, the government, have the numbers and the tactics to stop them this week in the House of Commons?
Well, I believe that a majority of MPs in the House of Commons this week will back the Prime Minister, because we know that the Prime Minister is making progress with our European friends and allies in attempting to secure a deal. And I don't believe, as the Prime Minister is making that progress, that people will want to erect a roadblock in his way. We all want to leave with a deal, and we know as a result of the conversations that the Prime Minister has had with Emmanuel Macron and Angela Merkel that the withdrawal agreement, which they had said was a block of marble that could not be altered, is now capable of being changed.
Not good news from Michel Barnier this morning. He still seems to think it's a block of marble.
Well, one of the things about Michel Barnier is that he's representing the Commission's position, and ultimately the Commission does as the member states decree. And with Emmanuel Macron and Angela Merkel, both having said that the withdrawal agreement can change, we have progress, and that progress has come about as a result of the Prime Minister's clarity on the question that we must leave on October the 31st.
So, if Keir Starmer and others are able to get their legislation through the House of Commons and the House of Lords this week, instructing the government that it may not leave on October the 31st without a deal, is there any way of avoiding that from your point of view?
Well, we don't know what's going to be in the legislation that's brought forward. Keir explained his intention, but from his point of view, perhaps understandably, didn't actually say what was going to be in the bill. But his intention is clear, and his intention is in essence to say, after 3 years, during which the referendum result has not been respected, to have more delay, and in that sense, we see the light at the end of the tunnel. We see a deal coming down the line, and just as we see the light at the end of the tunnel, Keir is saying, let's have more tunnel. I do not believe that the British people want more delay, more prevarication, more denial of their original democratic verdict.
The British people want a very clear answer to my question, which is that if this legislation goes through Parliament, both Houses of Parliament, does the government abide by it?
Let's see what the legislation says.
But surely the answer has to be yes, it's the law.
Let's see what the legislation says. You're asking me about a pig in a poke, and I will wait to see what legislation the opposition may try to bring forward, but we know what their intention is.
Constitutional times, but for a government to say we won't abide by legislation is impossible, surely.
We will see what the legislation says when it is put forward. For me, the most important thing is to bear in mind, actually, we already have legislation in place, which an overwhelming majority of MPs voted for. We already have an EU Withdrawal Act. We already have the notice on Article 50, the process by which we leave the European Union. The overwhelming majority of MPs voted to do that.
I understand
what Keir Starmer is trying to do now is to say, you know, British people, I said that we would leave. I said in my manifesto that we would leave. Now I actually think we won't leave. That is a denial
without a deal on the 31st of October. It's absolutely clear whatever the legislation actually says, we both know what it's going to try to do, which is to stop the government leaving the EU on the 31st of October without a deal. In those circumstances, he gets legislation through which commits the government to having to do that. Are you seriously saying the government could not do what they were told to do by House of Parliament?
I don't believe that Keir Starmer will get legislation through to that effect.
Well, that's another question. But if he does, my question is, if he gets it through, does the government abide by it?
Let's see what the legislation is that he puts forward. I can't comment on a bill that Keir Starmer, for entirely understandable reasons, hasn't yet published.
He made the point very forcibly and repeatedly that this prorogation is about frustrating the no-dealers in Parliament. Why can't the government just openly admit the obvious?
Well, one of the things that Labour MPs have been calling for some time now is a new Queen's speech. Valerie Vaz, the leader of the House, has asked for a new Queen's speech.
Oh, come on.
Chris Bryant has asked for a
perfectly
new
well
Queen's
this
speech.
is about stopping the no-dealers in Parliament.
No.
You have removed a crucial number of sitting days from Parliament ahead of the Brexit decision, the Brexit moment of truth, and you've done it because you know you might be frustrated in Parliament because you haven't got the numbers in Parliament. You know, the public know that. Everybody knows it. Why can't you just accept it? I mean, it's not dishonourable. You are trying to get the best deal you can. Why not accept it?
Well, we are trying to get the best deal that we can. You're absolutely right about that, Andrew, and I hope that people will appreciate that and give the Prime Minister the time and space to secure that deal. But I think there are two important things to say. Valerie Vaz, who, as I say, is a member of the Shadow Cabinet, Chris Bryant, a very distinguished Labour backbencher, and other Labour MPs have said, please can we have a Queen's speech? John McDonnell even said, please can we have a Queen's speech? And these are politicians, well, this is what they asked for, and now we're giving it. Okay. These are politicians who will not take yes for an answer.
Let me remind
But more broadly, we have a new Prime Minister. He wants to ensure that we can bring forward legislation in order to meet the people's priorities, in order to invest in the NHS, in order to cut violent crime, in order to deal with the cost of living. That is important. Now, you also raised the question.
Most of what he wants to do doesn't need legislation. It's spending money. And, you know, what you have done is you have removed a crucial number of sitting days from the House of Commons at an absolutely critical moment in the country's history. Let me show you what you have done, which is, there is the parliamentary timetable, if you can see it over there. As a result of the prorogation announcement, there are 16 sitting days left before we leave the EU, of which at least 5 must be taken up in the Queen's speech. If that hadn't happened, there'd be around, previous years, there'd be around 21 sitting days. So that's 5 or 6 sitting days just gone like that. But if Parliament, as it might well have done, had voted to carry on sitting through the party conference season, it would have been far more than that, possibly 34 to 43 sitting days. A huge number of parliamentary days have suddenly been swept out of the agenda at the crucial moment, just before we leave the EU. That is not a coincidence.
I think, looking at that graphic, that it's a mite disingenuous, because it is the case that actually, as a result of a new Queen's speech, there are only 4 days that Parliament might have been sitting when it won't be sitting, and there will be plenty of time for Parliament to debate our withdrawal from the European Union. Parliament will reconvene for the Queen's speech in advance of the European Council, where we hope a deal will be brokered, and then there'll be a vote on the Queen's speech after that European Council. So there are plenty of opportunities for my parliamentary colleagues to debate our departure from the European Union, as well as debating all the measures that the Prime Minister and the government want to have in our new Queen's speech.
And yet, here comes the bit that you'd expect, I suspect, which is what you told me in June.
Yes.
Because you said in June that proroguing would be absolutely wrong. Let's remind ourselves.
We are a parliamentary democracy, and suspending, or as the constitutional experts call it, proroguing Parliament in order to try to get no deal through, I think would be wrong. I think it would be wrong for many reasons. I think it would not be true to the best traditions of British democracy.
All across Britain, people agree with Michael Gove in June and disagree and are confused and bamboozled by Michael Gove in September.
All across Britain, people are wondering why you didn't show the question before that answer,
Andrew. The question did not mention the 31st of October.
No. The question did actually mention October, because it was in the context of a debate that was happening during the leadership election. And there was an idea going around at that time, which you put to me, which was that Parliament shouldn't sit at all during October, that it shouldn't sit at all before we left on the 31st of October, and I specifically said that I thought that would be wrong, and that is not what is happening now. And I think it's critically important that on behalf not just of myself, but other politicians who've been misrepresented, absolutely, Andrew, because there was a live debate at the time.
This is a distinction without a difference.
There is a huge difference. There is a huge difference, Andrew, and it is disingenuous. I'm not making a personal point, but it's critical. It is critical that people realise that there is a big difference. There has to be. There has to be prorogation before
crucial parliamentary days just before this. I thought when you said proroguing Parliament in order to try to get no deal through, I think would be wrong, you meant proroguing Parliament in order to get a no deal through would be wrong. I thought you meant what you said.
Yes, but you haven't actually revealed what you said beforehand, which was in the context of that leadership debate. And I think it's important because a number of my colleagues have been consistently misrepresented in this respect. You have to have a process in advance of a Queen's speech. Keir Starmer himself last week said, if you have a new Queen's speech, it is perfectly legitimate to go through this process that we're going through now. What I objected to, and others objected to, was the idea that Parliament should not sit at all before we left on the 31st. And of course, as I pointed out, and as you graciously acknowledged, Parliament will sit before the European Council and will sit afterwards. Parliament will be sitting right up until October the 31st. There will be an opportunity for MPs to debate the Prime Minister's deal. And there's something else as well. The reason... No. It's absolutely critical. And you acknowledged it earlier. We're not doing anything to try to facilitate a no-deal Brexit. We're doing everything we can to get a deal. The one thing that will make no deal more likely is if people erect a roadblock in the Prime Minister's way.
Now, no deal will happen unless you have a deal. At the moment, Michel Barnier and others from the EU side have said again and again and again, we have not seen, Michael Coveney was saying the same thing, we have not seen a flicker or any evidence whatever from the British government that they have a workable, viable, fresh alternative to the backstop. What is the deal that you are proposing?
Well, the first thing to say is that the existing withdrawal agreement has been presented to the House 3 times. I voted for it 3 times because I wanted to leave with a deal. I was prepared to stomach a series of compromises, as you know, with which I was not completely happy, just in order to honour that referendum result. But that deal having been put 3 times, we can't reheat the same stale porridge and expect people to digest it. We need a change.
What is your proposal now?
The proposal is that we excise those provisions within the withdrawal agreement that would lead to parts of the United Kingdom being exposed to European laws without us having a say.
Okay, so just the backstop. You're not looking at anything else except for the backstop.
We want to make sure that that part of the withdrawal agreement, which imposes on part of the UK European laws without a say, is taken out. It's also the case that there is, as well as the withdrawal agreement, as your viewers will know, the political declaration about our future relationship with the EU, and we want to make clear in that political declaration that our future relationship with the EU will be the best free trade deal in the world.
Now, your day job is looking after no-deal preparations, and we've got this big public information campaign just starting now. Get ready. Can I ask you some specifics? Are you absolutely sure that there will be no shortages of fresh food in this country as a result of no deal?
Everyone will have the food they need.
That's not the answer, Howard.
Well,
I'm saying, will there be shortages? And you're saying, yes, there will be.
No, there will be no shortages of fresh food.
Will food prices go up, as you used to say was inevitable?
Well, I think that there are a number of economic factors in play. Some prices may go up. Other prices will come down.
So in your preparing for no deal, in your preparations across the country, what are you doing to help families struggling on the edge of things already, unable to pay their food bills now when food prices go up?
Well, as we mentioned earlier, the Prime Minister in his Queen's speech is going to introduce measures to help everyone with the cost of living. And it is the case that in the spending review that the Chancellor will bring forward later this week, we will see direct interventions in order to support families and businesses across the country. Well, I think that you're pointing to one particular aspect of what has become known, and I hate using the phrases, Project Fear. One of the important things...
This is not Project Fear. This was all in the Yellowhammer documents that were released earlier this year.
I think there are 2 things to say. The first thing is that the Yellowhammer documents are a worst-case scenario. I would expect, that government...
You were the one who told us about food prices going up.
Well, I'll come back to that point. One of the things about the Yellowhammer document is it's a worst-case scenario. And you would expect government to say, look, if everything went wrong, this is how we would cope. In the same way as in my previous job as Environment Secretary, we planned for events like floods, so we knew that in the event of the worst happening, we were ready. But more broadly, what happens after October the 31st depends on decisions that government and individuals take now. And the purpose of our campaign is to help everyone to prepare for that, because if we take all the steps necessary, we can not only mitigate some of the risks, reduce some of the challenges, we can also prepare to take advantage of the opportunities of life outside the EU. And specifically on food prices, so much depends on a variety of factors, but it is the case that while And this is just what happens
Okay.
every season. While some prices may rise, others may fall as well.
In Operation Yellowhammer, it said the worst disruption to the short channel crossings might last 3 months before flow rates rise to about 50 to 70%. If you're doing just-in-time manufacturing or you're exporting food, that's a pretty terrifying prospect. Can you update us?
Well, one of the things I'll be doing in the House of Commons this week is updating people, because that scenario was one that predated the creation of this new government, and Yellowhammer and all of the predictions of what could happen in the worst possible eventuality are constantly updated. And as I mentioned, and as you were generous enough to acknowledge earlier, if we all prepare in an appropriate way, then we can significantly reduce any of the risks that occur. So Yellowhammer was pointing out what may happen in the absence of preparation if things do go wrong. But my belief is that we have taken steps in government, and others are taking steps now, in order to make sure that we are ready. And that's why I would encourage businesses and individuals to visit gov.uk/Brexit, which is the Get Ready page.
Right. Is free movement going to end on the 31st of October?
As we understand it, yes.
It's definitely going to end. Because, as you know, there are an awful lot of people in this country already, EU citizens, who are now very uncertain about their future. Well, 2 million people have not been given settled status. Many of those who have applied have not been given settled status. And as you know, they include people who have been here for 40 years, loyally paying their taxes, working hard, and are suddenly thrown into complete despair and worry about their future.
Well, let me reassure you, and let me disentangle these two issues. For the 3 million, more than 3 million EU citizens who are here, who are our friends and neighbours, they are not just welcome, we celebrate their presence here, and the EU Settled Status Scheme has been working very successfully. Thousands of people are applying every day and being granted settled status. People have until actually the overwhelming majority find the process straightforward, and it is the case that we have until December 2020 for EU citizens to register. The other thing is that the offer that we are making EU citizens is far more generous than any offer that any EU nation is making to UK citizens. And the reason we're making that generous offer...
You've asked me... working now. It's not working now. Lots of people up and down the country giving personal testimony. Well, this system is not working. You've had 3 years to make it work, and it's not.
I would politely push back on that. It is working well. We have had 1 million people who have received settled status, and it is the case that everyone who is an EU citizen here should receive that settled status, and it will be a path to ensure that they can continue to live and work here. Again, one of the things that I regret is that there have been 1 or 2 people in the political spectrum.
It's not 1 or 2, it's a lot of people. Anna Amato came from Italy when she was 2. She's lived here for 45 years.
You've interrupted my point. There are 1 or 2 people who are attempting to make political capital out of this situation.
This is a woman who works for the
NHS,
NHS, raised her family,
lady that you're mentioning. I'm talking about those who are attempting to make political capital out of this situation.
But there are many, many people who are not making political capital. They're desperately worried, normal people, trying to find out what their status is going to be, and the government is unable to tell them after 3 years of planning.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I'm seeking to provide the reassurance that this scheme can provide. The overwhelming majority of people have been granted settled status. There was 1 case just last week of a gentleman who'd come here many years ago from Poland, highly successful entrepreneur, who was uncertain because of the terms on which his settled status might have been granted. Within days, it was the case that the Home Office leapt into action in order to provide that assurance. It's always the case when you're dealing with a large number of people in any form of bureaucracy that there may be hard cases, but we move quickly in order to provide people with that reassurance.
Very quickly now then. In a word, we're heading to an election now, aren't we?
Well, I hope not. I think people have had a bellyful of elections. What I hope we're doing is heading to leaving the EU on the 31st of October, honouring that referendum result, and I hope MPs this week will give the Prime Minister the time and the space to secure the good Brexit deal, which I know is out there, and we can enjoy all the opportunities of life outside the EU.
Michael Gove, thanks.